Talk to me, not your smartphone. A simple appeal that says much about our humanity and how we value one another. Joining us now from Boston, Massachusetts for more on the power of face-to-face conversation, Sherry Turkle. She is director of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology Initiative on Technology and Self and the author of Reclaiming Conversation, The Power of Talk in a Digital Age. And Sherry, as I welcome you to the program, the title suggests if we have to reclaim conversation, that we've somehow lost it. How have we lost this ability?
Well, we've lost the desire in some ways because we now have an alternative. We can look at our phones and have our attention be wherever we want it to be and be with all the people in the whole wide world. And what we're losing when we sit down with a friend, with an intimate, in a business meeting, we're losing the desire and the ability to focus on the people we're with. And my book is a plea to remember all of the work the conversation does for us and to get back to it because we're losing a lot.
Let me follow up with this, because if you talk about reclaiming conversation, one could argue that we have never, probably in the history of the world, been in conversation more than we are right now. Admittedly, not so much face-to-face, but via text, via social media, via Skype. I mean, aren't we always in conversation right now?
Well, I'm talking about face-to-face conversation, or at least voice-to-voice conversation, because there's something very particular about all that you get from seeing the face, the voice, the eyes in real time responding to you. And when we deny this to our children, when we turn away from them to look at a phone as they're tugging at our sleeves, when we put our kids in strollers and don't talk to them but text instead, when you see moms in the park and they're not talking to their kids but they're sitting there as an opportunity to do their email in the park, we're losing the opportunity to build empathy, to build intimacy. This is the work that conversation does, and we're becoming insensitive to this, and really it's come to a point where it's dangerous. I mean, just one statistic that's shocking. There's been a 40% decline in all the ways that we know how to measure empathy among college students. That's no good in the past 20 years. That's no good. And that's linked directly to the introduction of digital media into their lives.
You do talk in the book about some of the experiments that have been done which will prove the statistic you just put out there. Do you want to let us in on one of those experiments?
Yes. Well, actually, the one that just turned me around is that if you put a phone on the table between yourself and the person you're having lunch with, two things happen to that conversation. First is that it moves to trivial topics because people don't want to be interrupted and be talking about something really serious. They want to, if they're going to talk about something serious, they don't want a symbol on the table that at any moment that conversation could be interrupted. And second, you feel less empathy, less connection, less of a stake to the person you're talking to. So if that person is your child, your lover, your colleague at work, that deteriorates the quality of our empathy, of our intimacy, of our ability to do business. And that's serious. That's no good. Has
this book now made, and of course the process of writing this book, made you more skeptical about the positive powers of technology?
No. I think technology is awesome. I teach at MIT. I'm surrounded by people who are inventing the most exciting new things. But I think that technology, as I put it, my favorite sentence in the book, technology has the power to make us forget what we know about life. And that's not technology's fault. Mothers know that when they're with their children, they need to talk to them, they need to read to them, they need to make eye contact with them and see their faces. Now, we have a technology that's so seductive that for a little bit of time, it lets us forget this thing that we know. And I think it's our job, after being seduced for a while by this shiny, bright object, to kind of pull ourselves together and say, you know, I love this technology, but I need to put it in its place. And I need to have the technology, but also reclaim conversation. One statistic that I think is very important, and I'm really not somebody who quotes statistics a lot, is that 89% of Americans say that they took out a phone during their last conversation. And 82% say that it deteriorated the conversation. So I think that my book is about unhappy campers, people who are ready to make the change and to make this technology work better for them.
Sherry, while we've been having this conversation, there's been a super underneath us the whole time saying a new silent spring. Now, if you're of a certain age, you'll get the reference. But if you're not, you won't. So for those who don't get it, fill in the blank, would you?
Well, Rachel Carson in the mid-'60s wrote a book called The Silent Spring that talked about, was really the first book to talk about DDT, the way in which we were hurting our environment, about ecological change. And it sort of blew the whistle on the fact that technologies that we thought were fantastic, you know, for controlling the environment, in fact, we're coming back to bite us, and we're having a really problematic effect on the environment. And that word, that metaphor of the silent spring, you know, something that's there you don't want to talk about, but that ultimately, if you pay attention to it, you can see. It's a moment where if you pay attention to what's going on with technology, you're ready to bite the bullet, address what needs to be changed. And I think that we're having that kind of moment with information technology. It's not going to happen overnight. Only now, you know, so many years later in this new climate accord, we're really, you could say, beginning to address seriously as a planet some of the things that Carson pointed to. But we're at a point where I think in most families, in the companies that where I interviewed, where I visited, in the educational settings where teachers are finding that their students have devices, but they're not paying attention to what's going on in class. So what's the point? We're ready to acknowledge that we've overstepped. It's about overstepping. It's not about throwing technology away. It's about understanding our vulnerability, and it's about designing for our vulnerability and getting control back. And I think we're ready to do that now. It's my book is optimistic because I found people who were ready to acknowledge that their lives were not better for the fact that they weren't paying attention to their children, they weren't paying attention to their colleagues.
Before we get to the optimism, though, I do want to pick up on the thread that you just put forward there in that last answer, and that is having to do with this. I think it was a middle school in upstate New York which asked you to come in and take a look around at what was happening because the kids were not relating to each other in a way that the dean of the school thought was constructive, and the dean was noticing some serious consequences. Fill in that story, if you would.
At this school, I was called in by the dean, by the faculty to consult, because what they were finding is that students were so much relating to each other through their texts and through their messages and through social media that they were losing the capacity really to look at each other and to apologize, you know, to read each other, to empathize with each other, and really almost being cruel without meaning to be cruel, because they were not picking up on the signals from other children. One comment I think that the dean made was that 12-year-olds play on the playground like 8-year-olds, and she was frightened. You know, she hadn't seen that. And when I consulted to the school, I mean, I saw that really students would sit, you know, it was a story where students would sit in the lunchroom and they would not talk to each other. They would talk about what was on their phones. And I think that it was such a good example of how quickly you can lose empathic response when you don't make eye contact. But I'm optimistic because other studies show how quickly, in fact, you can get it back. There's a study that shows that at only 5 days at a sleep-awake camp where there are no devices, where students aren't allowed to bring laptops or cell phones or anything, the empathy levels, which are depressed when kids come to the camp, start to rise again. And the question is, how does that happen? You know, what happens at this camp that's magic? And the answer is the kids talk to each other. And they say to me, when I studied a device-free camp, one young man says, I think he was 14, you know, when I'm at home, I talk to my friends about what's on our phones. At camp, we just talk about our feelings.
So what advice did you give that middle school upstate New York dean, and did she follow it?
Well, this is a very complicated question because I really suggest that at least part of the time in classrooms be device-free, truly device-free. And you see a lot of college professors, just parenthetically, I did a survey 5 years ago of college professors in my neighborhood, and basically the attitude of college professors at that point was, I don't want to be anybody's nanny. I'm not here to tell anybody what they should or shouldn't bring to class. Now people say, you know, when students bring their devices to class, they're shopping. They're on Facebook, they're on social media, and then they're shopping. No devices. Because we've learned that it simply isn't good for the educational process. And what's difficult is that this particular school had just accepted a kind of giveaway program from a large manufacturer of tablet computing, and they had basically put their library and curriculum on the phone, and it was very hard for them to implement device-free places if the students were relying so much on devices to basically do the curriculum.
I find when I need important information about how to lead a better life, I go to psychologists like you or academics, or sometimes comedians. Let's play a clip from Louis C.K. as he was.
I love this clip.
He's great.
I love this clip.
Well, here he is on Conan O'Brien a couple of years ago, and you know why I'm playing this. Roll it, please.
Okay.
You need to build an ability to just be yourself and not be doing something. That's what the phones are taking away.
Yes.
Is the ability to just sit there like this. That's being a person, right?
Yes.
No one can, you gotta check. Because, you know, underneath everything in your life, there's that thing, that empty, forever empty. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
Yes, I know what you're talking about.
That knowledge that it's all for nothing and you're alone. You know, it's down there. And sometimes when things clear away, you're not watching it, you're in your car, and you start going, oh, no, here it comes, that I'm alone, like it starts to visit on you. You know, just the sadness.
Yes.
Life is tremendously sad just by, being in it. And so you're driving, and then you go, that's why we text and drive. I look around, pretty much 100% of people driving are texting.
Yes.
And they're killing, everybody's murdering each other with their cars.
Yes.
But people are willing to risk taking a life and ruining their own because they don't want to be alone for a second.
That's so good. I'm wondering, why do you think it's so important to, using Louis' expression, just embrace the boredom and not feel the need to escape that moment?
Well, you know, I should say that this Louis C.K. Clip was, crucial to my. It was inspirational to me. I think he's a poet. He said what psychologists have struggled to say better than they did. The way in which the psychoanalytic tradition puts his message is that if you don't teach your children to be alone, they will only know how to be lonely. In other words, if you don't achieve the capacity for being alone, for being content within yourself, what you risk is that when you face other people, you kind of project onto them who you need them to be rather than who they really are, and you never really get into a true conversation with them. So basically, being alone and allowing yourself to be bored, means that you have a moment when you need to, think about you. And this is necessary. It's one of the signal achievements of childhood to be able to do this. And I say it's necessary because the capacity for solitude and the capacity for boredom is where creativity begins. It's where successful relationships, as I've just pointed out, begins. It's really where mutuality begins. It's where the capacity for mutuality begins. And in fact, neuroscience is now teaching us, just to show the point to which this extends, that we lay down our stable sense of our sort of autobiographical self through time in our moments of boredom. So when we experience boredom, our brains are not bored. Our brains are doing their most important, their most important work. But it gives you that momentary feeling, as he said, of alone. And now we have an alternative to never having to face that moment of, whoa, I'm alone. I have to just reach within myself rather than be stimulated from the outside. And I study people, one of the places I study people is at stop signs and supermarket checkout counters. And, when they have 3 seconds, at a stop sign, people take out their phone. That 3 seconds at a stop sign feels like too much to just tolerate. And 3 minutes at a checkout line is impossible.
That's an eternity.
It's an eternity. And these were times when people, used to be able to just, sit back and say, what just happened? Nothing glamorous. I'm not talking about, facing existential dread like he's talking about, or, the life's deepest questions. But it was a moment to kind of collect yourself. And we absolutely are giving up those moments for self-collection and self-knowledge to our phones and to sort of the hit of stimulation. And it is a neurochemical hit of stimulation that you get when you do a search, when you look at something, when you see an email. And here I'll just mention, the neuroscience of this. I don't like to talk too much about addiction because I find it sort of it makes people think that this is too much to handle. I'm addicted, I can't do anything. Turns out you can actually do something. You don't need to be constantly checking your phone. It isn't like heroin. So I don't like to talk too much about addiction. But it is true that we get a neurochemical high from checking our phones because it's new, it's social, it's stimulating, and you have to be willing to acknowledge that, recognize that you're vulnerable to it, and design around that vulnerability. If you're going to go on a diet, you don't stock the refrigerator with ice cream and brownies.
Let's pursue this notion of addiction that you just said, and I appreciate that it's not a perfect comparison, but,
yes.
but let's run with this metaphor. If there is an addiction, and I'm sure there is for a lot of people with their devices, what's the beginning of a 12-step program to get us off it?
Well, recognizing it, just like in a 12-step program, the first thing you do is recognize you have a problem. And what I find is changing now, but has been slow to change, is that people think of their phone as, I don't want to say a fashion accessory because that's a little strong, but let's just say like a fashion accessory. That's kind of there because it's wonderful, but sort of is just something they deserve and that is a wonderful part of modern life and hey, no cost. And I think that the first step is realizing that there is a cost and that can only begin, and that's why the focus in my book is reclaiming conversation. It can only begin with a recognition of the work that conversation does for empathy, for intimacy, for work, for relationships. You cannot go to a board meeting with your phone, do email during the meeting, and expect that that board meeting is going to get the same job done as when you didn't bring your phone. And yet a lot of boards, have been operating that way. Faculty meetings, classrooms, breakfast, dinner with your children, I quote one young woman in my book who's at camp, and her dad takes her out to dinner while she's at camp, and they're having dinner, and she's so happy to be with her dad, and he pulls out a phone to check, who is the cinematographer on some movie, and she says to him, "Daddy, please stop Googling. I just want to talk to you." And she's expressing the power of conversation, the work that conversation can do, and how quickly her dad was ready to just give it away, because after he checks the cinematographer, he sees a text that he sees an email, and then from experience, she knows, he's lost. He's lost.
I do note that the new Liberal government of Canada just the other day put out an edict saying that the 184 members of Parliament that make up the Liberal caucus will be forbidden from bringing their devices into caucus meetings with them, because they're so convinced that if everybody's got their heads down looking into their devices, they're not going to have the same kind of discussion. I presume you approve.
I love that. I love that. I'm all in, absolutely. I hope they read my book.
Let's move to this. You know that there are lots more people nowadays who, you talked about it as a fashion accessory. It's actually more than that and worse than that. It's now a friend. And this friend now has a voice and a name. It's Siri, right? It's Siri, and we talk to Siri, and we get Siri to kind of help us through tough moments in life, because Siri will listen to us in an utterly non-judgmental way.
Yes.
Now, what are the long-term ramifications of continuing along that line?
The whole direction of using digital devices, whether they're, Siri on the iPhone or a robot toy that you can give to your kids and it'll talk to you as a companion. This is a big trend, and I write about it in Reclaiming Conversation. And when I wrote so much about it, people said, "Oh, well, this is kind of the future. The future is happening now." A Hello Barbie comes out of the box, which is a new toy from Mattel, and it says, "Hi, I'm Barbie. I have a sister. Do you have a sister? Are you jealous of your sister? Let's talk." I mean, it asks for a conversation, for confession, for a relationship that offers pretend empathy. And that's really what we're talking about. We're talking about devices that offer pretend empathy. And we are cheap dates. When something offers pretend empathy, our reaction is, I'm in. I'll talk to something that's offering pretend empathy. I'm good with that. And it turns out that pretend empathy can do a lot of damage, particularly to children who are just learning what empathy is. So the whole area of what are we willing to talk with machines is a very hot topic, and one that parents really need to be thinking about, not just for their children, but for older generations, parents who were thinking about their parents who are perhaps living alone or in nursing home situations or some kind of assisted living, because another kind of fake empathy object is being marketed to these older people, and it's being offered as something that will help their loneliness. But an object that isn't really there, that isn't understanding a word you're saying in any meaningful way when you're talking about your life, your losses, your love, your sister, your children, is really degrading who we are as people and what we can offer each other as people when we talk to each other. So I think this is a very hot topic. It's a new topic, and I'm very proud of that aspect of my work where I want people to start to talk about this now, because the deluge of products that pretend they care about us is really just beginning.
If I may offer an opinion, you should be proud, because this is a really important contribution to this whole reclaiming conversation that we need to do. Reclaiming conversation, the power of talk in a digital age. Sherry Turkle, it's so good of you to join us on the line from Boston.
Pleasure.
Thanks so much.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.